Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and it's November, so I feel like it's time for those My Year in Books type of videos that I absolutely love to watch. There will be plenty more coming out in the next month about my favourites and least favourites of the year, but first I wanted to talk about a new reading experience that I first discovered this year. In case you couldn't tell by the title, it's audiobooks. In this video, I want to talk about my personal experience with Audible, give an overview over the books that I've listened to, and then give some general tips and advice at the end if you're considering using Audible or listening to audiobooks in general. This is going to be a long video, so if you want to skip to a certain part, just open up the description box to this video and there will be timestamps for the various sections of this video. I feel like this doesn't really need saying, but just in case, this video is not sponsored by Audible or anyone else. I first signed up for a free trial on Audible in January of last year in 2017. For those of you who don't know how Audible works, it's basically a subscription-based audiobook app where you buy credits either on a monthly basis or a whole bunch of credits at a time, and then you can spend one credit to buy one audiobook. The price for a credit varies depending on which membership you get. The more credits you buy at once, the cheaper they get. So for example, you can get the one book monthly membership where you pay £7.99 every month for one credit that you get at the start of each month. At the other end of the spectrum, you can get a 24 book annual membership where you pay £109.99 all at once in exchange for 24 credits, and that works out at £4.59 per credit. I went somewhere in between. I went for the 12 book annual membership, which works out at £5.84 per credit, and I paid £69.99 in January for the whole year. In addition to spending credits on audiobooks, you can also spend extra money on them if you want to read more than one book a month. But that's an option that I haven't used so far, so I can't really talk about that from experience. Anyway, going back to January of last year, I got a free membership trial and downloaded the book SPQR by Mary Beard to listen to. This was the first time I've ever listened to an audiobook and I really enjoyed it. I deliberately chose a non-fiction book because I've always enjoyed listening to podcasts, and I thought that non-fiction would be a smoother transition into the world of audiobooks. And it was. I learned a lot about the Roman Empire and I enjoyed listening to the audiobook a lot. I downloaded the app for my Android smartphone, but I also listened using the listening page in the web browser on my laptop. After I finished the audiobook, I went on to cancel my subscription because I wasn't quite ready to spend an extra £6 a month on audiobooks. But of course, Audible doesn't let you go quite that easily, so they gave me another free credit. Okay, I thought, and I downloaded another non-fiction book. This one was A Street Cat Named Bob by James Bowen. This is a somewhat fluffy memoir about a busker who befriends a cat and how their friendship helps him out of a difficult situation. Again, this was non-fiction, but of a more narrative kind, as opposed to the lecture-style teachings of Mary Beard. I enjoyed the book, again, and went on to cancel my subscription. Unfortunately, they didn't give me a third free credit because I was starting to wonder how many free credits I can chain, but that was it, until December of 2017, when I felt ready to give audiobooks another go. So I saved up some money and got the 12 credit membership in January of this year. Throughout this year, I've been listening to audiobooks of different genres and lengths and read by different people, and I feel like I am starting to figure out what I like in terms of audiobooks. So far, I've spent 10 of my 12 credits, and with that, I managed to buy 18 books. 9 of those books I got for a single credit because they were all bundled up into one, but more on that later. I listened to audiobooks mainly while I was out and about. I live in a fairly small town, so I tend to walk everywhere, and listening to audiobooks while I do that has made my walks a lot more interesting. I also take my cats Beetle and Minerva out for walks. Since they're cats, they don't really go far and spend most of their time sniffing at car engines or nibbling at plants, so these walks are incredibly boring if I don't listen to something. It also drowns out the amount of people giving you weird looks and comments because you've got a cat on a leash. Once I attracted the attention of a policeman who wasn't quite sure if there was something dodgy going on, only for an old lady to then come to my defense and telling him proudly that she used to walk her rabbit. In the house, I mostly listen to audiobooks while doing housework like cooking or hanging up my laundry, or while I do particularly brainless PhD work like filing and admin work and tidying my office. Now let's get on to the books that I listen to and some discoveries I've made about my own taste in audiobooks, and then some general tips. Out of the 10 credits I spent, 4 were spent on non-fiction books, and they were The Templars by Dan Jones. This one is a history of the Order of Templars, very straightforward, kind of a history book similar to SPQR, while not as expertly and brilliantly written. I enjoyed listening to this one more than I would have reading it on paper. When I read books, I find it difficult to focus on facts and absorb information, so I've realised that a big history book like The Templars is just perfect for me to listen to. Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth. This was the first book I listened to that was actually read by the author, and she did a really good job. This is a sort of self-help meets psychological research kind of book, and I thought it was very good. But with this one, despite Angela Duckworth's fantastic narration, I do wish that I had read it on paper instead. In an audiobook, it's difficult to go back to an earlier chapter or an earlier passage and reread something in order to better understand what's currently going on. You can't really flick through the book as easily. And this book specifically also contains a questionnaire, which you can access on the Audible website. But I still would have preferred to have this book with all of the questionnaires and diagrams and graphs, would have preferred to have that on paper. 1815, Regency Britain in the Year of Waterloo by Stephen Bates. Another very straightforward history book, this time detailing the British history in and around 1815. I had so many issues with this book, but the narration wasn't one of them. I realised by this point that history books do really well in audio format for me. Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge, read by the author as well. This was the first shorter book I listened to, only running for 6 hours. But this blew me away. Apart from the content, which was so amazing that it became the first and so far only non-fiction book I've ever given 5 stars to, Reni Eddo-Lodge narrates it in a very conversational and natural style that it really feels like listening to a podcast or a radio show rather than a book, but at the same time it is so well researched that it's the perfect combination of a conversational narrative and facts and figures and research. Really wonderful, and made me want to explore more personal non-fiction that's narrated by the author. By the way, if you are interested in full reviews of all of these books, you should check out my monthly wrap-up playlist. I always include a full list of books in the description box, and I have recently started adding timestamps to these, so it should be really easy to find the section of the video that you're interested in, you know, if you're after a specific review of one of the books that I'm talking about in this video. Anyway, I discovered that a certain type of non-fiction book does really well as an audiobook for me, specifically long history books that I might get bored with if I was to read them on paper or on Kindle, become a lot more interesting and informative once someone reads it out to me. I really wish I could listen to research papers for my PhD that way, because it would be a lot quicker and make me absorb the information much better than sitting there with a highlighter pen, reading the same sentence over and over again. Now let's get to the fiction. 6 of the 10 credits I spent was spent on fiction books, and those were The Complete Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. The very first credit I spent turned out to be a bit of a bargain, because for that 1 credit you get 4 novels and 5 short story collections, all read by the wonderful Stephen Fry. He's possibly my favourite narrator to come out of this whole year, and these books were just wonderful to listen to. I had read all of them previously, but hearing a fantastic narrator bring them to life just made them extra special to revisit. I listened to this collection on and off for most of the year, one book at a time, and still can't believe that these 9 very well read books cost me just £5.84. Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This is a historical fiction set in 19th century Iceland. I really enjoyed both the book and the narration of it, and it made me realise that audiobooks could be a good way of accessing modern fiction that would otherwise be too expensive for me, because I mostly buy my books second-hand and I very rarely pay more than £2 for a book. So the cost of new releases is not something I can afford on a regular basis, and audiobooks feel like a good compromise to me. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, read by Rosamund Pike. This was a weird experience because I know the book really well, but this was the first time I listened to it read out loud. The narrator is really very good in this one, but there were parts where I wanted to shout and complain about how Mrs. Bennet does not sound like that, and how about that sentence needs to be emphasized completely differently, just because that's how I've always read it. Still a very enjoyable audiobook and a different way to experience an old favourite for sure. Stormfront by Jim Butcher. The first real disappointment and a massive waste of money. Hated the book, disliked the narrator. Sorry James Masters, I know you have a lot of fans and I'm sure you're wonderful. And overall felt slightly cheated by a book that I had such high hopes for, based on the many positive reviews that I've read and watched about it. The recording quality of this one was also slightly dodgy, which I did not expect. Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. A very good fantasy book, narrated really well, but another one where I wish I'd read it on paper instead. The writing is really beautiful and somewhat poetic, and it was very pleasant to listen to, but sometimes I wanted to flick back a few pages to reread an earlier passage just to make sure I understood what was going on. Because this is a fantasy book, the settings aren't something that you can instantly picture, so it's really important that you understand all of the descriptions in order to picture a scene. I am planning to continue with this series. I really did enjoy it, but I will buy the next installments on paper or on Kindle instead. Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. This made me discover another favourite narrator, Simon Vance. He really brought this classic to life. Dickens' narration is so full of character anyway, with the dialogue super sharp and the characters very well defined through their speech. And Simon Vance managed to really do the distinctive voices of the characters that sometimes felt quite cartoonish, but never more cartoonish than they were in the original text anyway. And these were the fiction books I listened to this year. For full reviews, again, check out my wrap-up playlist and find the books you're interested in by looking for them in the description box. Before I finish, I want to talk about some of the lessons I learned about Audible and about audiobooks in general. Here are some tips. 1. Definitely make use of the free trial month if you haven't already. Even if you don't plan on continuing your subscription, it's a free book, right? 2, before you spend a credit on an audiobook, make sure you listen to the full free sample of it. Every book has a sample of about 5 minutes that you can listen to and will give you an idea of what the narrator is like. And then you can figure out if you really want to listen to this voice for 10, 20 or 30 hours of your life. 3. Check out different narrators for the same book. When I looked up Oliver Twist, there were over a dozen different narrators to choose from. I listened to the samples and then picked my favourite, which was, I think, a 6th or 7th result. So don't just go for the very first search result, but shop around a bit before you spend your credit on the book. 4. Look out for book bundles like the Complete Sherlock Holmes that will give you more books for your credit. I haven't found another one yet, but also I haven't really specifically searched for that. But if I come across something like that again, where, for example, an author's complete work is bundled up for 1 credit, then yeah, that's a good deal. 5. On the subject of money, audiobooks are a great way to access literature that you might not be able to afford otherwise. At least that was the case with me, especially when looking at newly released literature. I find audiobooks to be a much better deal than getting the hardback or the Kindle edition. 6. Audiobooks are a great way to discover classics. Classics are a bit hard to get through when you read them on paper. Not just because the style is a bit more dense and the vocabulary is a bit more obscure, but also because they're often printed in teeny tiny font on yellowed paper, which makes them even harder to read. Find a good narrator and that Jane Austen novel suddenly doesn't sound like it's 200 years old. 7. If you're not sure whether you like audiobooks or not, try nonfiction, especially if you enjoy podcasts, because a really well written and well read nonfiction book will give you the same experience as listening to a podcast. You'll learn something, and you'll learn something without even realizing that you're learning something. 8. Adjust the narration speed. I know a lot of people listen to audiobooks at double speed, and I take my metaphorical hat off to you. Your brains must actually be functioning at the speed of light. I cannot do that, but the Audible phone app lets you adjust the speed at tiny increments. So when a narration is just a bit too slow for me, I set it to 1.05 or 1.1 times speed, and that does the trick for me. I had to do that with the Simon Vance book and occasionally with the Stephen Fry one as well. And this was all. I have really enjoyed my Audible subscription so far, and I will definitely keep that going for the next year. Let me know if you listen to audiobooks, which apps and services you use for that and what you think of those. Do you have a favourite narrator that you want to recommend to me? And which genres do you think work particularly well as audiobooks or don't work at all as audiobooks? Thank you for watching. Bye!